To start, toxic masculinity is a term that many people have heard. I feel like it's definitely this buzz phrase that you hear, but I don't know if I personally have ever heard it defined very clearly. So your book covers this topic obviously at length. So can you help us understand what is toxic masculinity? What does that mean?
Well, let me answer that question through a sociological study. This is the most fact-based book I've ever written. So it's got a lot of sociological studies, a lot of historical studies, and sometimes it's better to just answer by, well, what do people mean by the term toxic masculinity? So there was a sociologist who's very well known, and so he gets invited to speak all around the world. He's not a Christian, but he turned this into an experiment, and he would ask young men two questions. He would say, first of all, what does it mean to be a good man? In other words, if you're at a funeral and in the eulogy, somebody says he was a good man, what does that mean? All around the world, young men had no problem answering that. From Australia to Germany to Brazil, they would say things like honor, integrity, duty, sacrifice, do the right thing, stand up for the little guy. I like that one. Be a provider, be a protector, be responsible, be generous. I mean, the sociologist says they had no trouble with this. They knew. And he would say, where'd you learn that? And they would say, well, it's just in the air we breathe. Or if they were in a Western culture, they would say, it's part of our Judeo-Christian heritage. And then he would follow up with a second question. And he said, okay, what does it mean if I say to you, man up, be a real man? And the young man would say, no, that is completely different. And this was interesting because I'll give you their exact words so you know it's not mine. They would say that means be tough, be strong, never show weakness, win at all costs, suck it up, be competitive, get rich, get laid.
Yeah, right.
So most people would say that second set of traits is the toxic set. At least if those traits get separated from a moral vision, they can easily slide into things like entitlement and coercion and power and power over instead of power under. So I think that what the sociologist discovered is fascinating because men are made in God's image. They do know what the good man is. That's what's so interesting about this. Everywhere, in every culture, people know what the good man is because they're made in God's image. Romans 2, right? We all know what the right thing to do is. We all have a conscience. But they feel cultural pressure to be, instead of the good man, to be the real man, quote unquote, which is usually defined in terms of dominance, entitlement, and power, and so on. And so it does suggest a better strategy for dealing with these issues. Most men do not respond well to being called toxic, which makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
Most of us wouldn't. But what this suggests is that we have an opportunity to call out what men already know it means to be a good man. They know it means it's just innate knowledge. It's how God made them. And so we will be much more successful, I think, if we affirm and support and encourage men in being the good man that they already know. That gives us a much more positive approach.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm excited we're having the conversation because I think that definition of toxic masculinity, we would all hopefully universally see dangers in people that are out to get their own way, to have control, to win at all costs, to, push other people aside, to dominate the weak. We'd say, yeah, that's not healthy. But there's definitely been a danger, I think, and I'm sure going to get into it in this conversation, that there's been a fear then for men of feeling like they're a man because they're like, well, I don't want it to be toxic, or I don't want to come across. And we kind of have started to paint, I think, masculinity with that one broad stroke of, well, any man is toxic. And so we've just got to be careful of men in general. It's like, no, I love that thought that there's a really good, healthy side of being a man and what a good man is that we all almost inherently know and see. And so how could we champion that there's a very strong, helpful side of masculinity in our culture, and separating that out from toxic masculinity seems to be a pressing need.
Yes, and there's an even stronger opportunity to encourage Christian men. because the sociological data is showing that Christian men actually test out even better than secular men. So our cultural climate says, masculinity is toxic. I mean, I start the book with quotes like the Washington Post had an article titled, "Why Can't We Hate Men?" I'm like, really? In respected publications like the Washington Post, it's now acceptable to talk like that. Or a Huffington Post editor who used the hashtag "Kill All Men." You can buy T-shirts now that say "So many men, so little ammunition." There are books out with titles like "I Hate Men" and "No Good Men" and "Are Men Necessary?" And even male writers are getting on the bandwagon. There was a book by a male writer who said masculinity. No, he said testosterone is a toxin that you have to work out of your system.
Wow.
And so, and then I turned to Christian men, okay? And that was easy to find as well. I found many people who said, if you believe in any concept of male headship or authority in the home, it will end up in abuse and patriarchy and tyranny and oppression. I'll give you just one quote on that. The co-founder of the Church 2 movement said, conservative gender, Protestant gender ideology feeds the rape culture. That's how she put it.
Wow.
Feeds the rape culture that we see permeating American Christianity today. And I read those and I said, wait a minute, you guys aren't reading the data from the social sciences, because in the meantime, I was reading the literature by sociologists and psychologists. They saw these accusations against Christian men and said, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? So they went and did the studies, and they found that Christian men who are actually, committed, church-going, authentic in their faith, they test out as the most loving husbands and the most engaged fathers. And so it's completely contrary to what the message that we're getting. They by the way, they do interview the wives separately, which is important. Because if there's abuse, of course, often the wives won't say anything. So what they're really saying is they're reporting that the wives are the ones who say they are the happiest with their husband's expressions of love and affection. Evangelical fathers are the most engaged with their children, both in terms of shared activities like church youth group and sports, and also in discipline, like setting limits on screen time or enforcing bedtime. Evangelical couples have the lowest rate of divorce, lower than the rest of the secular society. And the real stunner is they have the lowest rate of domestic violence of any major group in America. So contrary to the media messages, they're actually doing very well.